Just a quick shout and a thank you to the video sponsors OneFootball who just relaunched their app. You will find it on the App Store, it's 100% free to download. Upon installation, you will get the option to follow the football club that you support as well as the nation. You'll get regular updates on transfers, league positions, fixtures, results, and just about everything else that's going on in the world of football. You can watch highlights and everything else like that as well. It's the best football app on the market. I 100% recommend you download it ahead of the 2020-2021 season. Thank you and enjoy the video. Hello everyone, welcome back to another podcast today. I'm joined by former Yorkshire Evening Post journalist who's currently working for The Athletic, Phil here. How you doing, Phil?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So most of you will follow Phil on Twitter for all the inside Leeds United news, but you'll get a better insight via The Athletic, and it's currently only £1 to subscribe to for a limited time. Is that right, Phil? Have I got that right?
That's right, yeah. Jump in while you can.
Yeah, so make sure you get over there and subscribe to that. And while you're here, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe. We're on our way to 13,000 and like the video as well. That would be hugely appreciated. So a lot of you might think that because Phil's so invested in Leeds that he's a Leeds fan. But his allegiance actually lies with Hearts as a Scotsman. I just want to take us back a couple of months, Phil, to when we didn't know how the 2019-2020 season was going to end, whether it was we were going to play on, whether it was going to be points per game, whether it was going to be voided altogether. As we know, the Scottish Premier League ended on points per game, which saw Hearts relegated. And I just wanted to ask if you felt cheated by that, because we know that the Championship, for example, the Premier League didn't go that way. Some leagues ended on points per game, some played out. And the Championship, for example, March this year, Borough, Luton and Barnsley were in the bottom three, and none of them went down. Do you know what I mean? So there's a strong argument there to say that if Hearts would have been allowed to play on, they'd have stayed up. So do you feel cheated?
No, there is, and there were 8 games to go, which was enough time to get out of the position they were in. I see it from 2 points of view, really. I thought there was too much of the season left to kill the league at the point where it was at, and to relegate clubs. But at the same time, I'm also quite philosophical about the fact that Hearts were generally appalling last season, and didn't seem to get it together at any stage. Problems with the coaches, with the players. They were a desperately poor team, and I think it would be stretching it to say that they would definitely have stayed up if they played the last 8 games. The final match before they went down was away to St Mirren that they lost 1-0 and played really poorly, and I felt so the situation was not good for them. But you're right. I mean, they were the victims of points per game, and you know, the fact that it was settled like that. I think as well, the decision was taken really quickly in Scotland.
Yeah.
To kibosh it and to wrap it all up. Whereas in England, certainly in the top 2 divisions, I felt from the outset that there was a really strong willingness of the majority of clubs to play on. I think it was inevitable that Leagues 1 and 2 were going to finish in the way that they did, because financially it was going to be unfeasible for them to operate minus crowds, and without, and to fund COVID testing as well in the short term. But I know that Leeds, right from the start, were one of the most vocal clubs in arguing that the season needed to play on. You know, their preference was to play on, if not to play on, then to finish by points per game. And to be promoted, and they were absolutely prepared, although you know it never got close to this stage, absolutely prepared to fight the corner legally had the Premier League tried to avoid relegation and promotion because of an early finish. But I just felt that in England there was more of a will to get it done, and more of a will to make sure that at the end of the season it was 46 games in the Championship and it was 38 in the Premier League, whereas in Scotland it felt as if the first sign of COVID and the first sign of a suspension was like the starting gun to wrap everything up.
Do you think that's what it was then? That the financially the SPL just felt they couldn't continue, or did they just throw the towel in?
There were issues with the TV deal, and there were issues with trying to get this season, certainly in the Premiership, to start on schedule and to run as it was supposed to do. There's a new television deal with Sky kicked in up there, and this season has started. You know, they have got going. They haven't got any crowds back, inevitably, but the Premiership is playing now and is back up and running. It felt as if there was far more attention up there given to what was going to happen this season, as opposed to how last season needed to finish. Whereas there have been a lot of priorities with this. They've had to juggle a lot of things. So it wasn't as if in England they could disregard the schedule for 2020-21 and, the way of fitting the European Championships in next summer, assuming they go ahead as planned. But it felt to me as if the first port of call before anything else was to make sure that the season was finished, the season was done, and they had league tables that were credible and kind of determined by the full fixture list as opposed to an early finish and points per game. I mean, as it happened, points per game would not have been too contentious in the Championship because the league was as it was, after 37 games. But you're right in what you're saying about the way in which it changed, particularly at the bottom of the league. And also you saw at the top end that Brentford had the chance to get promoted automatically. It was all there for them after West Brom lost away at Huddersfield. So that the last stretch of the season is always significant and it is always dramatic and eventful. And I do think that the better move, without a doubt, was to play it out.
Yeah, so I'm sure you'll feel just hard done by it. But obviously, touched on the Championship there. Leeds won the league by 10 points and after 16 painful years, finally back in the Premier League. So light at the end of the tunnel for you in a way. And I know you're a Hearts fan, but there must be a big part of you that's Leeds. And you must have been so just over the moon to see it finally arrive.
Yeah, there haven't been too many moments in football where I've felt it in the way that I felt it with that promotion. I think particularly Hernandez's goal down at Swansea, which that there was still what to do on the back of that, but you kind of felt like that was the one. You felt as if Brentford in particular had been chipping away and trying to get there and trying to that idea that they might just reel Leeds in and it felt like one punch too many for them. It just felt like what looked like being a 1-0 draw, a 0-0 draw, dug out right at the end by that Hernandez goal. And I mean I still remember the celebrations of the coaching staff and the players, and you did just feel that they kind of sensed that they were there. They sensed that they'd made it. And I mean, the Friday night when Leeds went up and the Saturday and the Sunday, it was a fantastic weekend. And I think what I was pleased about was that people seemed to find a way to make the most of it. Despite the fact that everybody was supposed to be distancing and there weren't crowds in the stadiums for these games, there weren't crowds there, wasn't a crowd there when Leeds lifted the title after the Charlton game. It still seemed as if everybody was able to feel it and everybody was able to bask in it. And I'm not saying it's the same as it would have been. And I feel very sorry for the club and the players and Bielsa that they didn't get the full show of open-top bus parade around the city and everything that would have gone on, especially for a club who've waited so long for this to happen. It was really unfortunate and they kind of had my sympathy in that sense. But even with the players, I think what happened was enough. I think they felt it regardless. They realised, it did touch them properly. And it is certainly in terms of covering this club, I mean, it was an experience like no other.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke a few times before and I think we said at one point, you came into the club around like the time we were in League One, or just as the worst years in our history were kind of taking place, and then you've left the Yorkshire Evening Post a year before we've gone up. So we jokingly kind of said it's you. You were
it probably is. I mean, when I left the EP last year, I wrote in my final column that my first competitive game, Leeds, and I went as a number 2 rather than chief football writer, but was the playoff final against Watford in Cardiff. And then my first season doing the job at the Evening Post was the season where they went down to League One, and then they had 3 seasons in League One, and there was administration, obviously, and then a long stretch in the Championship where it never quite seemed to happen, and playoff defeats, and even last season where it seemed as if the semi-final against Derby was pretty much wrapped up and well in hand. They conspired to lose that. So I was saying in that piece, now that I'm leaving, it is absolutely nailed on that you're going to go up. And sure enough, canter the league, win by 10 points. And actually, there were periods of last season where you didn't necessarily feel as if Leeds were 10 points better than the rest of it. But I've got to say, by the end of the restart, by the time you got to the end of the Charlton game, you really did feel that they'd been by far and away the best team in the division. No contest. You
kind of briefly touched upon it was a shame the way the celebrations happened. It's not the way people would have wanted it to happen or the way it could have happened. But I kind of like to think of it as, had we have gone up off the field, do you know what I mean? We were relying on another game. It would have been like that. People would have gone to Ellen Road. So it would have, I mean, fixtures may not have gone that way had the season carried on as it was meant to, but the celebrations as in going to Ellen Road on that night, I think it would have been like that anyway had we have gone up normally off the field and relying on another game. So I like to look at it like that. And the celebrations at Millennium Square, and then when the players come out and lift the trophy on the bus outside the ground. And I know a few people were sort of hacked off because the club told them to stay away, but people had to realise that the club had to be seen to do the right thing by what the government was saying. But really, they wanted us there, and they'd want us in the ground now, but they just can't. Do you know what I mean? They've got.
They were between a rock and a hard place with that, and I think the feeling with the bus was that outside the ground was that there would be a start point and a finishing point for it. So, you know, if they didn't publicise it, there wouldn't be too many people there, so they couldn't be accused of, you know, encouraging a ridiculously big gathering. Although it was, I mean, it's big enough. I went
huge.
out afterwards and milled around with everybody else. But when the celebrations finished and when the players were done on the bus, it did feel like a finishing point, and you know, people did start to go home, and it was agreed with the safety advisory board, and everybody knew that there wasn't going to be an acceptable answer to it. I think it's just the numbers, isn't it? I think had there not been the pandemic, you'd have been talking far bigger numbers on the Friday night Ellen Road and in town and everything else. But you're right in what you say. I mean, the alternative was for it to finish via points per game. And I'm not sure how anybody would have celebrated that. You know, I don't know.
It'd have felt bittersweet, wouldn't it? It'd have felt.
Well, it would have done. And it would, you know, I always felt that the idea of promotion being confirmed by, you know, an email from the EFL would have been the biggest kind of anticlimax and kick in the teeth for a club who've gone through so much to get there. And, you know, it was almost a relief in the end that you did have those moments and it did feel proper. And it happened in something close to the way that it was supposed to happen. Because, I mean, points per game it would have been a good conclusion in a technical sense, in as much as it would have sent Leeds up. But from the things that matter in football, like emotion and you know, the pleasure of it. I mean, this is why you follow a club. You know, you follow a club for the romance, don't you? And it's not very romantic to have it announced on Twitter that Leeds are going up because they finished on this number of points after 37 games.
So I mentioned that you've been here since we lost to Watford. In the playoff final, and then obviously the following season we were relegated to League One, and that was my first season as a season ticket holder. So I vaguely remember certain things, and then the following season playoffs and etc. But I just wanted to ask, in the time that, you know, was probably the worst years in our club's history, what has been your worst memory, your most bizarre memory, and your best memory? Which I think I can guess what your best one will be, but.
If I start with the best memory, I mean, it's fresher, so it's always going to be like this. But Hernandez's goal at Swansea will take a lot of beating. I mean, in an odd sort of way, that little 3-4 minute spell after Huddersfield scored against West Brom just gives you that sort of buzz and tingle that you don't often get in football. Just that realisation that actually, on the basis that West Brom needed to win, to prevent Leeds going up on that night, it just wasn't going to happen. You know, that Leeds were actually there and they'd actually done it. I mean, there've been other terrific moments as well. The promotion, obviously, 2010 was great, and also like and these obviously didn't amount to anything, but the Becchio goal against Millwall and Howson's goal away at Carlisle, just in the moment when it happens, it really, really does stick with you. But I think when I look back, the Hernandez goal at Swansea was the one, you know, just that real rush of thinking,
it was
you
the
know what,
moment
they've done it. They've done it here. This is going to be enough. Worst moment would, without any question, have to be that game against Ipswich when they went down. I mean, there was some proper misery in League One, like Histon and Hereford and everything else, and those were grim afternoons and really woeful performances, evening at Hereford. But I think with the Ipswich game, it was that feeling of the entire place fracturing, of the total breakdown in the relationship between the club and the supporters. The fact that they were going down to League One for the first time, and there were already suspicions that they were going to go into administration. You know, the implications seemed really, really severe. Nothing as even the big sort of, the moments that look so promising, like the semi-final last season, and that came to nothing, they don't compare, I don't think, to that type of massive implosion. In terms of bizarre, God, where to start? I mean, I always go back to the time when I went to interview Chilino in Ellen Road, and he'd come back from Bahrain meeting GFH, and he had an Arab headdress and cloak with him that he was wearing, and he was jumping around the office shouting "God is great" before we sat down to do the interview, and you just thought, this is probably something I'm never going to see again. But I have to say, it's not the only bizarre moment that I could go on for hours about that, but that would certainly be very near the top of the list.
Yeah, we've been through some stuff over the past 16 years, but it's been a bit mad since we went up. I feel like we've become a different club overnight, obviously with Adidas, JD being linked with big names, and we're back, and amongst those big names, Ibrahimovic, Cavani, the one we actually managed to secure somehow, Rodrigo Moreno. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you were shocked as anyone when we pulled that off.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and we'd been well aware that they were keen on Ollie Watkins down at Brentford, and they spent a lot of time focusing on that one. But Rodrigo, they had going on in the background. And I think the thing that surprised me, not only the fact that the deal was done, was the price that Valencia were willing to sell him at. They'd held firm when Atletico Madrid and Barcelona had a look the previous 12 months. And you'll see the contrast with Watkins having gone to Villa yesterday for £28 million. Leeds have landed Spain's number 9 for £1 million less. And granted, Watkins has time on his side. There's a lot to like about his game. I mean, there is no doubt that Bielsa and Orta both thought that he would be a very, very good fit. But Rodrigo just feels like a different level of signing. And it feels like the sort of signing that takes you from the EFL years to the Premier League years. And you're right as well about the sponsorship deals. I mean, the club will earn about £10 million combined from the different kit sponsorship deals for the matchday kit, the training kit, and everything else between the sleeves and the main sponsor, your secondary sponsors. It's suddenly big money, and of course, revenue in general shoots up because of the TV deals. They are, needless to say, getting into the Premier League at a time where the TV deals are under a bit of pressure because of rebates and the absence of crowds, and the way in which Sky and other broadcasters are having to rethink. But ultimately, they have the advantage that they're going into the Premier League with a sort of financially a championship setup. The wage bill is around about £50 million, which is high in the Championship, but is not significant in the Premier League. So they do have leeway there with a vastly increased revenue stream from TV broadcasting rights and sponsorship and commercial deals and everything else. So it has changed. Yeah, no, it has. And it was always going to. I always felt that with Leeds. As soon as they went up, things like that would start to develop, and you would see them operate in a very different way.
I remember signing Luke Murphy for $1 million, Belushi for 2.7 million, and now we've just gone out and just signed Spain's number 9 for 27 million like it's no, and it's just new for me. It's new for everyone, I suppose, because it's obviously we've broke a transfer record, but it's just it's a different world.
Yeah, it is. It is, although it is the world as the Premier League has been for a long time. It's just that Leeds and we haven't been there, so you see it from afar and you don't know quite how it feels or exactly what it's like. But I was always under the impression, if they went up, that they would comfortably break the transfer record, because anybody like Watkins or Benrahma or your top end Championship players, never mind players like Rodrigo coming from Europe, fall into that wage bracket now. The £80 million that was spent for Ferdinand 20 years ago was a huge fee at the time, but it's not a huge fee anymore. I mean, there are clubs in the Championship who from time to time have spent in that ballpark on an individual player. So yeah, it's a new world, and it's hard not to be very excited about it.
You touched on Watkins there, and my mate's a Villa fan, so he's obviously over the moon that they've secured Watkins. But I can't help but think they have overpaid, and I know that Villa fans might turn around to Leeds fans. There's a lot of petty bickering over Twitter. There has been for a few weeks now between the two fan bases, which I think is unneeded. It's just petty, but they would argue that we've overpaid for Rodrigo because obviously he scored 4 goals last season, blah blah blah. But it annoys me because they need to understand that Rodrigo is a complete forward. He plays 5 positions. He's, in my eyes, more of a creator than a scorer. Whereas Watkins is I know he can play on the wing, but he's sort of tied to that one position. He's been playing striker over the past 2 seasons nearly. So, and off the back of one good season in the Championship where he scored 27 goals, I just think 33 million, that's what it rises up to, isn't it? That it's just a bit of a ridiculous fee. Villa can pay that, obviously, but I remember when we had Chris Wood and he scored 30 goals in that season and we sold him for 15 million. So I think, over double that for Watkins is overpaying a bit. But for us to get Rodrigo,
the market's moved since then, and the market moves constantly. And the reality with somebody like Watkins is that you if you want him, you now have to pay that sort of price. It's just how it is. I mean, I think both clubs should be happy with what they've got on the basis that they got what they were after. And there's no point pretending up here that Leeds weren't interested in Watkins and didn't like him, because they absolutely did. I think in the same hand, it's ridiculous to pretend that Rodrigo isn't an elite signing. And I think you're right. I mean, there is far more to him than his goals. And actually, if you start to look closely at the way Valencia play and compare that to the way that Leeds play under Bielsa, I think there's a strong chance that Bielsa's tactics and style will bring out of Rodrigo his core talents, in a way that perhaps Valencia won't. But I mean, to my mind, they're both good signings in different ways, and it, as I say, it's strange to mock Villa for the signing of Watkins, given that Leeds were very, very keen on him, and it's equally weird to suggest that Leeds have taken a wrong turn by going for Spain's established number 9.
Yeah, it's like they're saying we're doing a Fulham. It's literally, there's no comparison. It annoys me because Fulham went up, spent 180 million, signed 16 players. We're being tactical about it and being smart about it, investing. Like Brighton wanted 40 million for White, and then we've gone and got a striker for 27 million, a Champions League striker. You know what I mean? We're investing smartly, but I've just got to start here. From relegation in 2007 up to and including last season, we've spent 60 million. But in this window alone, including Costa's fee, albeit we're paying it over a number of seasons, it comes to 63 million. So it just shows how far we've come altogether. We also signed Koch to replace Ben White, as I just mentioned there, a German international. And they seem like they're very similar players. What do you make of the whole sort of Ben White situation, and obviously the whole Free Ben White campaign, which got a bit out of hand? But
yeah, I certainly got the sense that White was keen to come back. I don't think there was any doubt about that. And Leeds were encouraged enough to have a go with 3 bids. I mean, he was exceptional last season, and you could see in him the potential to become a really top-level centre-back quite quickly. I still feel, though, that there's always a top value for anybody. And they just needed to be careful with White that they didn't push themselves to the point where they were severely overpaying for him. And as it happened anyway, Brighton were just not receptive to the offers. They didn't want to particularly negotiate. They didn't want to get into a scenario where they didn't want it to make it look as if they were keen to sell, because it really doesn't seem as if they are. And I mean, from Brighton's point of view, they've never really given him a look in down there as a first-team player, but I think you have to remember that they did resist Leeds' attempts to put an option in the loan. They were very adamant last summer when White signed that there wasn't going to be an option because they didn't want to sell him. They didn't want him to go permanently. So, when you look at it in that context, I am surprised that Brighton didn't take the money for him. I really thought that they might look at it and say, for somebody who hasn't played in the Premier League yet, perhaps that would make sense. But equally, I understand when you pick through his performances last season why you would see it as a bit of a risk to get rid of somebody like that, because he has vast potential. My feeling is the weeks have gone on, and I mean the proof will be in the pudding with this, because we need to see what Robin Koch is like in the Premier League, and we need to see how he settles in. But if he has similar skills to Ben White, they're quite similar players. If he is able to adapt and to slot in the way the White did into Bielsa's defence, and if the defensive organisation remains, I think you're going to look at a Germany international for 30 million as very, very good value. And you might end up saying that, given that White was going to cost, if Brighton had ever got to the point of dealing, White was going to cost 30 million plus, and you've got a Germany international at a similar age and with similar talent for half the price, maybe it has worked out, and maybe despite everything, this was the way it needed to go.
I trust Bielsa completely, and he proved his worth when he replaced Janssen with White. I mean, everyone sort of questioned that, and I did at the time, because Janssen was sort of not the heart of the club as much, but he was the most passionate player. He was sort of, in a lot of people's eyes, irreplaceable in terms of just him as a person. But it was a right call completely, and he's probably the best defender we've had since the Premier League. Obviously, we're back now anyway, but it seems that we also want a number 10. We've been linked with quite a few: DePaul, Rafinha, Draxler, and we know the DePaul link is strong. He's been liking tweets about joining Leeds. He's unliked them now after all the sort of commotion about it. Has there been any movement at all? Have you heard anything?
No, I mean, Leeds are very, very keen on DePaul. They've not made a secret of that. But the kind of message we were getting after they did Rodrigo and Koch over that weekend for £40 million was that they were likely to sit tight for a little while, let the start of the season come, and just to kind of take stock and see where they are. I mean, he's going to be expensive, DePaul, if they manage to get that one done. And they're going to have to, they would have to make a decision on whether the valuation is right, whether it's right
no less
to
than 40
invest
million
at that level. Well, and they do have obviously a lot more money to play with this summer, Leeds, but at the same time they still need to get their investment right. And I agree that the talk of doing a Fulham is kind of irrelevant. I mean, the numbers in terms of numbers of players coming in, it is not even comparable. So it's two completely different strategies. But you don't want to overspend to an excessive degree, and you don't want to find yourself spending what you shouldn't do on a player. So it feels with that one that they've just been holding off a little bit. They've been sitting tight and waiting to see what happens. I think to an extent, they've obviously got a month to go or a good few weeks to go in the window. I think they'll look and see how they start. They'll look and see how the team feels, how the team looks as they play. And, if they need strengthening, I'm absolutely certain they will. And I very much doubt that, in fact, I can't see the business being done with two signings. I think an extra centre-back is probably going to come onto the agenda, much as Bielsa didn't really see that as necessary at the start of the summer. I do think they need cover on the left side for Liam Cooper, and he might reach that conclusion as well. But obviously, winger number 10 type is still very much on the list and what they're looking for. So I don't think they're finished. I definitely don't think they're finished. But it just didn't feel after the Rodrigo and Koch weekend that they were going to suddenly rush into another couple of deals.
Right, fair enough. So what about Rafinha and Draxler? Are they just more along the lines of Ibra and Cavani, where it's just sort of maybe there's a little bit of interest, or are we serious about them?
Well, I mean, the message I've been having is that Rafinha is not wanted in the same way as DePaul is. And Draxler, I just don't see any conceivable way that could happen. I mean, I might be wrong, but he'll be on a huge salary at PSG.
Yeah.
And the reports from France saying that Leeds have had a nibble also said that he wasn't particularly keen and didn't seem to fancy it. So that probably falls into the Cavani category. But they have been ambitious with who they're looking at, and they were very much given the indication at the start of the window that they wanted to look at the best of the Championship. They had a good look at Ben Rama down at Brentford as well, but it went cold on him, and in the end are not going to pursue that and not going to go after them. I mean, I'm interested in the end to see where Ben Rama does end up, because he clearly is a really, really talented footballer. But I mean, Rodrigo kind of set the tone for the window, didn't it? All of a sudden, signing somebody like him, it did just feel like that huge jump from EFL transfers to Premier League transfers, and it felt like the sort of signing that, if it works and if it goes well, could really, really take Leeds forward quite impressively.
It did shock a lot of people. You've got Chelsea fans, Scum fans, City fans, Liverpool fans, all questioning as to why and how we've pulled that off. And we have been very ambitious, and I'm over the moon about it. We're not looking at championship-proven players, and that's not a dig at Watkins and Villa, or it might be. But, I'd have taken Watkins in a heartbeat, to be fair. I can't see any fault with Watkins as a striker, but we have been very ambitious, yeah. And we're linked with, in fact, no, just to touch on Ben Rama there as well. You said we've gone cold on him. Is that due to his personality and his attitude by any chance? Because I've seen a few people sort of say that's come from the fact that he not seems like he's up his own arse, so to speak, but the video he put out of having himself filmed on holiday and stuff, it just spoke
Yeah, it didn't. It didn't
Sorry.
go unnoticed that by the club. They did take note of that, and they were aware of it. And I think the question at Leeds always comes back to, how is somebody going to fit into a dressing room, into their dressing room? And I know that conversation takes place at every club. It's not as if any club want to sign a player who's going to cause problems or who's going to unsettle the place. But Bielsa's a real stickler for that. There was obviously the clash of personalities to a degree between him and Janssen, and he likes small egos. He likes dressing rooms that he can mould, and dressing rooms who do what's asked of them and are able to follow his instructions. So they went from a point where they've been looking quite closely at Benrahma to a stage where suddenly it just didn't feel like that was one that they were keen on anymore. And there is no doubt that they did take note of that video.
So we're linked with anyone else? Is anyone else closer than, say, Rafinha and Draxler, so to speak?
No, not at this stage. I mean, they've bid for Ryan Kent up at Rangers, and that offer was rejected. I think it's quite significant that they haven't been back in for Kent, which tells you that they have other options that they're looking at, and that he's not the out and out target that they have to have. I think the thing with Kent is you can probably do him at a lower fee than slightly more ambitious targets. But at the same time, they really have held off on that one, and haven't got too involved since then. They like Axel Tuanzebe over at Manchester United in terms of other centre backs. Ben Cabanyo down at Swansea.
Yeah.
We actually profiled. He's been linked recently. We profiled him in the transfer piece we did at the end of last season, because he had a very similar set of attributes to Ben White. Played in a similar way and could do many of the same things. And as I say, I think they will want to cover at centre back. I think they will. Well, it will be Bielsa's decision, and how he's been. He quite often goes with what many of us would think is a very, very thin squad. But that looks to me like the one area where they could do with somebody to cover if Cooper is injured or suspended. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks, because they will do some more business and they will get other players in. But I think they'll probably be swayed by how the opening couple of games go and how they feel about the squad in general.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, we've covered the positions that we needed to cover. We've prioritised the striker position and the centre back position. So I think it makes sense to sort of lean off now and let the season start and see how things go and decide if we do need to recruit anyone else. And as you say, I do think we will sign at least one or two more players anyway. But I think it just depends on how we start and whether they need to spend the amount of money that certain clubs are asking for. When can we expect Bielsa's signature? And I know we've spoken off camera that you expect it to be today, so I don't know when this video is going to go out. By the time it's gone out, it could have already signed, or it could be before. So
they've been working over the past 2 or 3 days to get this finalised and tied off. So I've been kind of sitting thinking any moment now, probably since Wednesday lunchtime. But he goes at his own pace for this, and it's all very detailed, and it all takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of back and forward, translation to Spanish and translation to English, and all the things that have to be agreed. So he's been on the verge with this for weeks. It's been essentially agreed, and in this broad form since around about the start of pre-season, and the Leeds have not said no to any of his demands. They've been absolutely no fallouts over money or anything like that in terms of salary and so on. That's just not an issue. But it is just a case of waiting for him to put pen to paper. The one thing I would say is that it's never felt this summer as if there was any doubt about the fact that he is staying. The contract's obviously unsigned, and I know this will look very weird to people on the outside or people who don't follow the club closely, because it's not a scenario you see very often. But I mean, he's pushed the squad in the same way, he's coached them in the same way. It's been the same drill, same routine through the summer. He's overseen the friendlies. Transfers have been, have had all the input they need from him. They've been, players who are signed in the image of his team. So there's no sense of wavering commitment at all. It's purely about getting the paperwork signed. So, like you say, hopefully by the time this is out, it will have been done. And I know that the club were keen to make sure that it was done this week, because while it's not a huge problem and while it's not a huge issue, I think they're aware of how it looks from the outside, you know.
Yeah, people are just panicking, and they shouldn't really, because again, as we said off camera, we've got his word, and you know he's been overlooking the friendlies and the transfers and everything, so there's no indication that he was ever not going to sign.
No, I don't think so.
But it just seems to have taken a lot longer than people were expecting, I suppose. And but as you say, if you expect it to be today, that's great news, and I don't know when it's going to go out. But as long as he's signing and everyone can just calm down a bit, that's fine. Ahead of the first game this weekend against Liverpool at Anfield, which sounds mad to say. Again, this is all new for me. It couldn't have been a better start, really, or a worse start, whichever way you want to look at it. Champions against champions. In all honesty, how do you see this one going?
Yeah, I was chatting on to James Richardson about this yesterday, and I was saying that, you know, the laws of chance say that it'll be a home win. I mean, and you can apply that on the basis that Liverpool hardly drop any points at Anfield and have this ridiculous record going back years. You know, most consistent side at home that you could possibly hope to find. So it's a very difficult game in that respect. I did just feel, though, towards the end of last season that they dropped off, and that sort of buzz and spark that had been there for so long did seem to disappear a bit. I mean, I'm sure it didn't help that the title was already as good as done and there was no chance of Man City catching them when the restart came back around. But even prior to that, you know, the European Cup game against Atletico Madrid and everything else, they just seem to have gone, not stale, but they seem to have gone off the boil slightly. And they haven't done much in the transfer window. I mean, they haven't been active in the way that Chelsea have, for example. And the noises that come out of Liverpool from Klopp and others make it sound as if they're being very careful with the money at the moment. So perhaps that presents an opportunity. And I've got to say, you know, Leeds were in great form towards the end of the season. They really did look so strong in the run-in, with the exception, you know, obviously Cardiff was a bit rusty. And then we had the Barnsley game, which was just pure tension. That was the long and short of that fixture. But aside from that, they looked extremely accomplished. And because it's been such a quick turnaround and because they literally had 2 weeks off and were back into training, you would like to think that some of that bounce and some of that impetus will still be there. So I think it could be fairly tight on Saturday. You know, if you were pushing me, I would have to go for a Liverpool win, because you know, that's what common sense tells you. But I think the important thing for Leeds is to compete, you know, to get over there, to look good, to look like they know what they're about. To give Liverpool a decent game and to come away feeling like the confidence is still pretty much there.
That's the thing. If we lose, we lose. There's nothing to be ashamed about losing to Liverpool at all. We've seen that they can hammer teams like Man City 5-0 if they want. You know, they've got that in them. So I would like us not to get battered. Do you know what I mean? I do want us to go there and give them a game and show what we're made of. I want it to be tight. Like we went to Arsenal and gave them a game, played them off the park for 45 minutes, and we came out of that game people talking about Leeds, not Arsenal. Do you know what I mean? So
that's what Bielsa won. Yeah.
If we do come away with no points, you know, at least give us that performance and get people talking about us. But there is a part of me, and obviously it's biased and obviously it's hopeful, I do think we can get a draw there. I don't think we'll win, and that's just being realistic. And you know, being realistic could say, well, we can't even draw, but I think we can get a result there. I do.
I think it's quite nice to have the jeopardy as well of not knowing. You know, particularly with Bielsa, you felt as if Leeds should be good enough to win every game they played in the Championship. It wasn't to say that was ever going to happen, but you very rarely looked at an opposition side and thought, well, this is going to be, you know, they'll be lucky to get anything out of this. It just wasn't like that. Whereas suddenly things shift and everything changes, and now you're going into fixtures where you can't be wholly confident that it's going to go well because of what you're up against. But you know, this is what everybody was after, and this is what everybody was looking for. And if you're going to become an established Premier League team, you have to find a way to compete with these sides. You know, it's not that it's going to be a long, long time before Leeds are competing as a top 6 club or higher. Again, you know, that is going to take patience. But, you know, to start to climb the league and to start to get a foothold, you have to be able to go to Anfield and play. You know, you have to be able to go and at least look like you might take something from there, even if you don't. And Bielsa doesn't really differentiate between opposition. You'd expect them to play as well against Liverpool as he would have against Charlton on the last day of last season. That's just how he works.
Well, we saw it last season where Norwich went up and played City, so that were champions against champions, and Norwich won. I know we're at Carrow Road, but it's possible. And we've just got to have that hope and that ambition. And it is quite refreshing, like you said, to go there and not expect anything, and be the underdog, because it's not felt like that for a couple of years. So it is quite, in a weird way, refreshing to feel like that. Do you see Rodrigo or Koch featuring in the starting 11?
I'm not so sure. I would be quite surprised if Rodrigo did, because unlike Koch, the Spanish leagues have been shut down for quite a while, and he wasn't training with Valencia towards the end because he knew he was going to be sold. Whereas obviously Freiburg far more active, and Koch, I think, will have been, should ideally be in better shape because of that. I would have thought if there was a temptation to play one of them, it would be Koch at the back alongside Cooper, to fill that gap that's been left by Ben White. But if they were both on the bench, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. You know how Bielsa thinks when it comes to prepping players and making sure that they're ready. He doesn't tend to, it doesn't tend to give players much leeway in that sense. He isn't particularly lenient with them. So if they were training yesterday at Ellen Road, they'll have done mother ball. He'll have seen the stats from that. He'll have seen with the naked eye what's going on, how it looks to him. And if he isn't convinced by either of them yet, then I think it's more likely that they will be on the bench. But I think Koch in particular, I would probably feel more reassured with the team if he was in there.
Yeah, fair enough. And do you see Liverpool winning the Premier League this season, or do you think someone else will lift the trophy?
I think it'll be very tight. I think City will have a better go at them than they did last season, and I wonder, minus key additions, whether Liverpool can perform in exactly the same way as they did. I mean, they're going to be in the running, but the chances are they're going to find Chelsea being more competitive. I still think Chelsea defensively have questions about them, which makes me wonder whether, despite the sheer amount of money they've spent, they can really get in the mix for the title. But I think games like Liverpool Chelsea will be more difficult for Liverpool because of what is on the what is up the other end of the pitch. And Manchester United look like an improved team with Fernandes since he's come over from the continent as well, and I'm sure Tottenham will want to be better under Mourinho. Arsenal will want to move forward under Arteta. It could be a more difficult league in that sense, but Liverpool are going to go close. I mean, they have to go close, and having been so strong last season, I really don't see them dropping off to that extent.
You'd hope so as a neutral that it's a lot tighter, because I think the Premier League's dropped off in terms of entertainment and competition in the last few years. It just seems to be, I mean, for a long time, to be fair, it's been that big six clubs, do you know what I mean? And everyone else just sort of muddles around. I know Leicester won it and that were an exciting season, but other than that season where sort of Arsenal and Spurs were up there as well, I can't really remember a season I've watched and thought, it's tight. It's competitive.
No, well, obviously the previous season with City and Liverpool, where it was borderline settled on goal difference. I think the issue is that Liverpool really peaked with the signing of Alisson and Van Dijk at a point where virtually every other club was starting to go through slightly transitional phases. City coming to the end of the David Silva era, and
Chelsea bringing through the youth.
Yeah, well, Chelsea moving on to Lampard, and then kind of different approach up to this summer where they started spending again, and then you had Arsenal, who Wenger went through Emery, and now on to Arteta, and Spurs have obviously been and gone with Pochettino. It feels as if there are a lot of top six clubs out there that need to settle down properly and to kind of find the momentum again. And obviously over at Old Trafford, Solskjaer and everything else, whereas Liverpool have been the kind of machine, it's all fallen into place for them beautifully, and Klopp's built cracking side over there, which just worked, and certainly domestically worked perfectly last season for so much of it. But I'm with you. I think it'll be tougher this season. I think it'll be more competitive.
Yeah, I hope so. And in terms of competition, do you expect any dark horses this season? Because I think Everton could be up there. As you say, Arsenal are coming on, Southampton as well.
Everton have made some good signings, yeah. But I'm yet to be convinced. Really, they should have the ability to get into the sort of area that Leicester and Wolves and Sheffield United were in. To be in that ballpark. But I still think realistically they probably fall short of your top side. I don't think that, despite James Rodriguez and Alan coming in as well, I still don't feel that is enough in itself to bridge the gap to the top 4 or the top 6.
I think James and Alan are 2 very, very good signings, and I think Ancelotti were a step in the right direction from the get-go.
Yeah, sure.
But as you say, they've not got enough quality in the whole side yet to be up there. But I think they'll do better, and it's a massive step in the right direction for them. It's building blocks. So
yeah,
I think within a few seasons they'll be back up there, and they deserve to be as well. Everton proper club, and I'd like to see them back up there. Where do you see Leeds finishing?
My gut feeling is probably bottom half, but in a position that is not problematic. I think it'd be asking a lot to finish top half, because it does start to get very strong when Leicester have a lot about them, Wolves do as well. It starts to get really, 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 really strong once you move into that area of the table. But I think I see a difference between Leeds and Norwich in that Leeds are a very good attacking team, a lot about them, like dominate possession and really clear on what their style is and their tactics. But that side of the game has never made them defensively weak. They've always been strong at the back. They've always been really, really organised. And I think if they can go into the Premier League and have the bravery to attack, but with a solid defence behind them, then they've got a really, really good chance. So I would like to think that somewhere from sort of 12th to 15th is very achievable for them. I think you have to be realistic about the fact that it's not unusual for promoted sides to get to trouble at the bottom of the table either. No. And I don't think any of us can predict with absolute certainty. Whereas you felt certain that Wolves, when they came up, would gain a foothold quickly because of the players that were in their squad and because of what they were
playing with a Premier League side.
You knew that they would settle quickly, and you didn't think that it would be a problem for them. It's slightly more difficult to predict with most clubs, and I'd say the same about Bielsa, because again, he's going in with the thin squad, which he likes to do, and it's worked for him in the past. A lot of players are new to the division, and he is as well, which is not necessarily a problem, but obviously they do need to adapt. So it's hard to say, but I would like to think, given the signings they've made and some others that might come in, that they'd have a chance of definitely being comfortable.
I know it's very hopeful and again biased, but I think, and I'll stick by it, and I've said it from before we signed Rodrigo and Koch, that we will finish 9th. And I know that's very, I've got high expectations, but I do think we're capable of finishing top half, and I think we can use Wolves and Sheffield United as blueprints. And I'm not saying the play style that Sheffield United have is in any way the same as what we've got. They do different. I think Sheffield United are a much more physical side, and I think that the family with Wilder and the fact that they'd been through the leagues together played a huge part in the season they've just had. But I do think we can use that as a blueprint, and I do think under Bielsa we're capable of finishing top half. And I know you're saying it's going to be a lot more competitive, which it is. I'd take 12th to 15th 100%. I'd just take staying up, obviously. That's what you want to do in your first season. We're going to be realistic. But I think a key thing about Bielsa as well is, and it's seen throughout his career, that he loves to be the underdog. And this season, in a lot of ways, we are the underdog, and I think he'll thrive on that. You can see from the clubs he's joined throughout his career, he's not gone to Barca, he's not gone to Roma. All these clubs who've approached him, he loves to take sort of a crisis club and build them up, and it's exactly what he's done with us. And what he's tried to do with other places, Newell's Old Boys and stuff as well. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Just to quickly wrap up as well on a topic that a lot of people are discussing: fans back in stadiums. And I know that you tweeted about this morning, that the original plan to get everyone back in October, or a 25% capacity back in October, has now been sort of derailed because of we're back in lockdown or ish. No one really knows what's going on, let's be honest, and not a lot of people care anymore, which, that's just how it is. But can we expect maybe later October now, or after October, or?
It's very hard to say. I mean, the problem with this, and this was the same when you went back to March when the lockdown started, was that everything was at the mercy of what was going on in the country and what leeway was provided to football and what you were able to do. So when it got to the point where clubs were able to test and to bubble and everything else, it became feasible for the games to start up again because of how isolated the grounds were going to be and how few people were going to be in them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different consideration when it comes to having supporters back in the stadium. And the government at the moment have restricted or have cancelled all pilot events with crowds of more than 1,000. And if you take Elland Road as an example, or Anfield, or Old Trafford, or the Etihad, or any Premier League ground, there is literally no value to the clubs of having 1,000 fans in the door. Those 1,000 fans would be pleased to be in, I'm sure, but for the logistical effort of making sure that it was safe and distance, it makes no sense. And one of our Man United writers, Andy Mitten, was writing yesterday about the fact that they were hoping at Old Trafford in kind of mid-October to have a crowd of about 12,500 in there, which is a meaningful number, and it covers starts to cover a reasonable chunk of your season ticket holders. I don't see any way in which that can happen, given that the restriction on pilot events is now so tight. And I think you're totally dependent on the government. And let's be honest, there's been quite a lot of flip-flopping, and the advice has changed, gone forward, gone back. Some of it's been quite inconsistent. You couldn't really predict what they're going to do with this and when they're going to say, do you know what, clubs can go ahead. I mean, the clubs have all been planning for it. The clubs have all had ideas in their heads of what they might do, and making preparation. But ultimately, you need to go ahead from the authorities. And at the moment, I couldn't tell you when that's going to come.
Yeah, for those who didn't know what the plan was, it was going to be 25% capacity of every stadium, and season ticket holders for us. In our case, it'd be every 1 in 4 games. There is an argument there to say that people were literally saying there is no point in going. People go to football not for the football, or a lot of people don't go to just watch the football. It's for the day, for the atmosphere, for have a laugh with your mates. And none of that was going to be possible by sitting with a seat spare in between everyone and forward and behind in silence. Do you know what I mean? And it just wouldn't have been. I would have gone anyway, just because I'd like to watch the football. But it just wouldn't have been the same. So people were saying, just sack it off until we can all go back.
I think that's true, but there are going to have to be steps with this, in the same way as that there've been steps for return to school and return to offices and everything else. I think if we're waiting for the day when 35,000 are going to be able to pack back into Elland Road, it could be a long time, and it probably doesn't help to get to that point if you don't have pilot events and if you don't start to test the water by having X number of, a percentage of seats filled and building it up and seeing if there's any problem and seeing if there are outbreaks, or if there seem to be outbreaks in Leeds that are linked to the fact that there are fans back in the stadium. You need to test this stuff, because it's impossible to think that you could go cold turkey for months and months and months and then suddenly one day say, right, Elland Road's open tomorrow and 35,000 people are going to pack in. It's just not going to work that.
I wish. But I like what West Brom have done, giving people the option to have the season ticket roll over to the following season, which obviously is a risk because they don't know what league they're going to be in. But nothing about this year is fair, do you know what I mean, on anyone. So it's just the best they can do.
Financially, it's a nightmare as well, because, the Premier League were talking about this yesterday and saying if there are no fans back in the ground, and if TV broadcasting carries on the way it is at the moment, then they're looking at another hefty rebate back to Sky and whoever else. So that's going to a shortfall in the accounts. Clubs never ever want to lose season ticket money, and as it stands, it's impossible to let any season ticket holders in. And also the broadcast rights are much tighter in the Premier League, so I don't think streaming is anywhere near as easy either. So it's hugely complicated, and it's a real headache for the clubs. And I know that they were as keen as anybody to get fans back in and to get back to some form of normality with spectators and fans, but it's not a promising move, that the fact that the pilots are being restricted again.
No, but I suppose we've got to take the precautions. Thanks for coming on, Phil. Anyway, we're coming on an hour now, and I know that you're a very busy man, and you're eager to get on the Bielsa signing news. We've got
Bielsa's press conference coming up shortly as well, which will be fascinating, because there's a lot to ask him.
Good. What have you got in mind? Anything in particular that you're gonna fire?
Well, his contract, obviously. I want to hear his thoughts on the new signings, what he thinks of them, and what's to come in that respect. What else he feels he needs and how things need to change. But I don't expect him to go overboard on this. But I also want to get his thoughts on him against somebody like Klopp on Saturday. It's
very
elite level,
selfless,
really.
though, isn't it? He's very selfless.
He is. But he'll have some good things to say today, I think, without a doubt.
Well, I look forward to it, Phil. And again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for an hour of your time, and it means a lot. And yeah, I think we've covered just about everything, and look forward to the weekend now.
Good man, Lewis.
Nice one. Thanks a lot, Phil. Have a good day, mate. See you in a bit.
Yeah, you too.
Just a quick shout to FCI Markets, who are the official digital partner of Leeds United and sponsors of Josh Warrington. They're an FX broker and want to push the media side of their company, so they've come to me for help. It's a company run by die-hard Leeds fans who've followed us around the world for over 40 years, and they'd like to connect with you, my audience, in an attempt to gain more publicity and have a relationship with their customers. Head over to their website now for advice on trading and follow their socials, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, for more of an insight into the company and what they want to achieve.